So now that we're all warmed up, so I'll be talking today about parables and myths from the White Lotus Sutra. So I imagine many of you won't have heard of the White Lotus Sutra. The White Lotus Sutra is from the Mahayana period of Buddhism. So there are three great phases of Buddhism, roughly falling into 500 years periods. So from the time of the Buddha, what followed is referred to as the Hinayana, which about 500 years. Then we have the Mahayana coming, a later development for another 500 years, and then the Vajrayana, again 500 years. Yes, so we're talking about from around the time of Christ to 500 Common Era. And the White Lotus Sutra is it's a highly symbolic sutra. So I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to be turning off rational mind and inviting our imaginations. So in a way, the Mahayana is very much about it's a very symbolic realm. So we have Shakyamuni Buddha is the key figure in the sutra, but this is not the historical Buddha. This is in a way it's mythical Shakyamuni Buddha. And there are many sutras within the Mahayana. Some, lots on wisdom and often very big, vast scope. And the White Lotus Sutra is no exception. So, it's vast in its scope, both in terms of space and time. And very much this realm of the imagination. So I'll tell the arc of the first half of the sutra, but so in amongst the story of the sutra itself, you have these parables and myths that are told either by the Buddha or by one or more of his disciples. So when I tell one of the parables, I'll invite you to close your eyes and really, in a way, lose yourself in the imagery and see what happens. Remember, body throughout. We've just done a good warm up, and that's a really good foundation for allowing imagery in and noticing what we respond to. So I'd invite, even if you're familiar with the sutra, if you're familiar with the parables, and you might find yourself thinking, oh, I know this one, I know what this is about, but really listen for something new. So you need to actively listen and listen for our responses. I thought I would start with a quote from Sangharakshita, and I'll be drawing exclusively in a way from his commentary on his lectures that he gave on the White Lotus Sutra. So this is Bhante Sangharakshita talking about the White Lotus Sutra. The Siddharma Pundarika, or the Sutra of the White Lotus of the Good Dharma, speaks almost exclusively in the language of images. Although the sutra is very long, its conceptual content is absolutely minimal. The White Lotus Sutra, therefore, appeals not to the head, but to the heart, not to the intellect, but to the imagination. its parables, perhaps the most significant in the entire range of Buddhist canonical literature, are famous throughout the Buddhist East, and it is also replete with myths and symbols. In form, it's a sort of drama, even a sort of mystery play. It has for its stage the entire cosmos, and the action lasts for millions of ages. The dramatis personae consist of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, arahats, gods, demons, and men, in fact, all sentient beings whatsoever. And the atmosphere of the sutra is very strange, an atmosphere of miracle and marvel. In fact, as the sutra unfolds, what we see is a sort of transcendental sound and light show. There seems no other way to describe it. As for the theme of the drama, it is a very great one indeed. It is enlightenment, not just the Buddha's enlightenment or the disciples' enlightenment, but the enlightenment of all sentient beings whatsoever. It is the drama of cosmic enlightenment. So hopefully that's whetted your appetites a little bit. So I'll start off with setting the scene of the sutra itself. So the sutra opens with the Buddha sitting on Vulture's Peak, very high peak, in a way halfway between heaven, as it were, and earth. And he's surrounded by tens of thousands of disciples, so there's a vast gathering. And there's different kinds of disciples. You've got 12,000 arahants, people who've gained enlightenment, sort of a lower kind of enlightenment in the Hinayana. 80,000 bodhisattvas, these sublime beings that have gained enlightenment for the sake of all beings, and tens of thousands of gods and other non-human beings. So, 2, 4, 6, 8. We're 10 here today, so multiply that by a lot. And then the Buddha delivers a discourse on infinity. Everyone in the audience is deeply moved. Beautiful flowers begin raining down, and the whole universe shakes in 6 different ways. Then the Buddha enters into a deep meditation, and this pure white light extends from between his eyebrows, and it sweeps the entire universe. Through that, innumerable world systems are seen. So it's not just this gathering, but many world systems are seen. And in each of these, we see a Buddha teaching. Everyone in this big gathering here wonders, what is going on? What is about to happen? And a very famous bodhisattva who's associated with wisdom makes a proclamation. He says the Buddha is about to proclaim the White Lotus Sutra. So then the Buddha emerges from his meditation and he says, the truth in all its fullness is very difficult to understand. So difficult is it that only Buddhas are able to understand it. Only they and no one else are able to understand it. So what he's saying is that the truth must be revealed gradually. First there's a lower ideal, and then, only then can we see the full ideal of perfect enlightenment. He says beings would be terrified if he taught everything all at once. Like reality in its fullness is too much to bear, it's too much for us. And he's basically saying particularly to the arahants who have a sort of a lower enlightenment, he says, there's more to learn. So at this point there's a dramatic occurrence. 5,000 of the Arahants stand up and just walk out. They're like, "Puh, nothing, how could there be more to learn?" And Buddha is saying that there is only actually there's one great way, which is the Mahayana. And as part of this, we offer just a flower, and we're treading the path to enlightenment. We act with some faith, just a simple offering at the shrine, for instance, offering a stick of incense. We're on the path to Buddhahood. It's very, very encouraging for us. A small act of faith leads to a greater act of faith, leads to a greater still act of faith. And at this point, one of the Buddha's chief disciples is filled with joy. Shariputra is just filled with joy. But there are some in the audience who are doubtful of this higher teaching. So what the Buddha does, he doesn't just try and convince them and say it all again, but in a slightly louder voice. He tells them a parable. So here we have the first parable of the White Lotus Sutra, which is the parable of the burning house. So you might want to close your eyes. I'm going to read a rendition of the parable, and I'm reading you a story. You come along, and it's a Dharma talk, but I'm really think of it as you're listening to a story. Maybe imagine a nice warm, cosy fire here. The parable of the burning house. It's a day like any other. Here we all are inside our house, and as usual, playing with our various toys. We go from one little game to the next, and back again, running uncontrollably through the house. The house that we're in is very run down. The walls are crumbling, and there are holes in the floor. But we run about regardless, unaware of the dilapidation all around us. In the corners of all the different rooms of the house, there are all sorts of ghosts and spirits lurking. Sometimes our games seem fun, and there are lots of other children like us playing their own games. Even when our games don't seem quite so much fun, we still continue playing them as enthusiastically as ever. Meanwhile, whilst we're all busy playing in the house, our father outside sees that the house is actually on fire. The flames are all around us. We're all in great danger. Somehow we don't even see. We continue playing as before. Our father outside calls out to us, pleading with us to run from the flames, but we are all oblivious, catching an occasional glimpse of him from the window and then carrying on as before. Then we hear that he's got some amazing gifts for us. Suddenly we go running out of the house, pushing and shoving each other as we go. When we finally get out of the house, we realise that our Father has something far greater for us than what he'd previously shown us. And not only that, but we all enjoy sharing the same great and unexpected gift with all of our brothers and sisters. As we stand with each other, enjoying this incredible and unexpected gift, we look back at the house and see it completely ablaze. we wonder how it was that we'd spent so long playing in the burning house whilst we'd all been in such danger. So, at this point it feels important to mention that there's a dilemma or a tension between staying with the imagery and explaining it too much, and I don't want to explain things too much, but I want to at least give a few little pointers. But yeah, again, encouraging you to stay with your responses and internally noting any responses you've had to this and the other parables. But yeah, the Father is the Buddha, we are the children, and the world that we live in, the universe, is the burning house. So I just wanted to ask a few questions, not for you to answer now, but just to drop into your awareness. Firstly, what is the danger that we're in? And what sort of games do we like to play? What sort of games do we get caught up in? What sort of gifts might cause us to leave the burning house? Okay, so back to the sutra. Remember, we had these disciples that were doubting that there's some other teaching. But after hearing this parable, there are 4 leading elders who were doubting, but they're now convinced and full of joy that they've seen that there is a higher teaching. And one of them, a famous disciple of the Buddha, Mahakāshyapa, gives his expression to his joy by himself telling a parable. So we go straight into the second parable of the sutra, which is the myth of the return journey. So again, allowing your body, your imagination into the myth. The myth of the return journey. Once upon a time, there was a young man who left his father and went to live in a faraway country. For many years, the son wandered from place to place, desperately poor and lost unto himself. Meanwhile, his father was living a very different kind of life. He became a successful merchant and amassed great wealth, eventually commanding great influence and respect among men far and wide. Despite all his success, though, and lavish lifestyle, he never forgot his son, always there at the back of his mind, and often wondering what had become of him. Then one day, completely by chance, the now not so young son happened to pass by the mansion where his father was living. Of course, he was oblivious that this majestic dwelling was actually the residence of his own father, and of course his many servants. But the rich man knew at once that the poor man outside was his son. He called out to him and sent his man after him, but this only served to startle and scare off the poor man. Though initially surprised, the rich man soon realized that his son had been living very differently to him for many, many years, and that they had become quite different from one another. Still, the poor man was still his own son, the rich man thought, and however low he had sunk, he was confident that he would one day be able to reunite with him. So the rich man sent 2 of his closest aides after his son, but disguising themselves in lowly appearance. They found him on a nearby street corner and offered him work at the mansion, shoveling a huge pile of earth at double the normal rate. The poor man accepted at once and moved into a small hut at the back of the rich man's mansion, and was soon shoveling away at the great pile of earth, all the time unaware, of course, that he was actually working for his father. As time went on, he became more and more comfortable in his surroundings and became accustomed to walking through the great mansion. The rich man approached him one day, dressed in lowly clothes, and told the poor man that he was very happy with his work, that he shouldn't think of leaving, and that if he was ever in need of anything, he should just ask. The poor man continued to shovel away at the now diminishing pile of earth. Then one day, the rich man became ill, and he knew he hadn't long to live. He saw that the poor man was becoming ever more accustomed to being in the mansion, and he went to him and told him that he trusted him completely, and that he was handing over to him responsibility for all his affairs. This felt like a natural step for the poor man, and he began to get used to handling great wealth while still living in his little hut out the back as before. As time went on, he began to feel ashamed of how he had previously lived, and began to wish for himself that he too could become rich. Then one day, the rich man's condition took a significant turn for the worse, and he knew he had just days to live. He immediately called for the king, the princes and the noblemen and all his fellow merchants, gathering them all together for a great meeting. He sat, frail before them, on his great throne, and announced that he had something of great importance to tell them. "Your Majesty, lords, ladies and noblemen," he said, "I have summoned you all here today to introduce you to somebody very important. Many of you will remember that some years ago I took into my house an aging and poor man, giving him work and a roof for his head. You will have seen that as time has gone by, he has become more and more like me, and I have entrusted him with ever more responsibility, such that he now has my complete confidence and trust, and holds ultimate responsibility for all my affairs. This man who stands here before you now has been on a great journey. He has spent many years wandering before ending up at my mansion and beginning to step into his inheritance. And I use this term not figuratively, but quite literally. His journey has been not just a great journey, but a return journey, a return to his father and to all the riches to which he has been heir all these years. Your Majesty, lords, ladies and noblemen, this is my son." And with that, the rich man breathed his last, leaving his son to live out his inheritance with all the riches he had now realized were his own. So again, staying with our responses to the story. I just wanted to point out a few little pointers coming out of the story. So we can talk in terms of having a lower self and having a higher self. Having part of us which is just concerned with getting on in the world and maybe quite a kind of poor mentality perhaps. And then there's a higher self, as it were, that's connected with something much greater than what we normally associate with, identify with. So yeah, obviously the father, the rich man, is this higher self, our own higher self, and the poor man represents our lower self. And yeah, there's a separation for all of us. I think there's some separation between these different aspects of ourselves. And actually, yes, the lower self actually doesn't even recognise the higher self. When the rich man first approaches the son, he runs away. He's scared. But yes, slowly over time, he comes into relationship and begins working for the rich man, for his father. I think one way this can manifest is when we meet someone who we think, they're very much more developed, they're more spiritual, they're more positive than I am, and we can think they've got all the qualities, and I'm just me. And there's a useful step in a way, but we need to go past that step, and actually all those qualities that we see in that person, those wonderful qualities, actually they're our own qualities. So we need to find a way of being in relationship to someone with those qualities, whereby we gradually realise the reality that actually they're our own qualities. Thought I'd read Sangharakshita on this subject. So, Bhante Sangharakshita, the higher self never loses its awareness. It's conscious all the time. Although we may completely forget the higher self never forgets us. But at the same time, and this is the mystery, we are it. Imagine an enormous subterranean chamber all lit up from within. We are living in a tiny chamber next to, indeed part of, the big one. There's a pane of glass which is transparent only from one side that separates the two chambers, so that although someone in the large illuminated chamber could see everything going on in the little chamber, from the little chamber we can see nothing at all of what is going on in the large chamber. In fact, we have no idea that there is a large chamber. But although cramped in our little chamber, we may forget, even be oblivious to, the existence of the large chamber. The large chamber always has a window onto the little chamber. Even though the lower self forgets the higher self is the higher self of the lower self. I think we can take great encouragement from this, that times in our practice when we're not in touch with anything higher, it doesn't feel like we forget that there's anything higher. Actually, there always is, always there, and that's always part of who we are, even if we're not feeling in touch with it. So we can have faith and confidence that we can act in a way whereby that does kind of come consciously more into our life. I know you're all wondering, gosh, this is all great, but what's happening in the sutra? So we're going to go back to the narrative of the sutra itself. So the return journey was given as praise by one of the Buddha's disciples, and the Buddha then praises the elders, and he goes on to say that as well as teaching step by step, teaching people step by step, he adapts his teaching according to what different people need, to suit different people's temperament. So we're all, we've all come along, and we're all connecting with Buddhism, meditation, with the Dharma in our own ways, and we're all very different. We all look pretty the same. And we're from different countries, but we all, on the face of it, we look pretty similar. But actually, we have very different temperaments. I don't know, most of you I don't know at all. Some of you I know quite well. One person in particular. So we have very different temperaments in the way that's part of. We need to sort of understand that as part of our practice when we're meditating, when we're working on ourselves. What are we actually like? Yes, there's this meditation practice. Yes, there's this thing that's recommended. But what are we actually like? So to communicate this, the Buddha tells a story. So we have the third parable from the sutra. It's called the parable of the rain cloud. So the Buddha says, "It is like unto a great cloud, rising above the world, covering all things everywhere, a gracious cloud full of moisture, lightning flames flash and dazzle, voice of thunder vibrates afar, bringing joy and ease to all. The sun's rays are veiled, and the earth is cooled. The cloud lowers and spreads, as if it might be caught and gathered. Its rain everywhere equally descends on all sides, streaming and pouring unstinted, permeating the land. On mountains, by rivers, in valleys, in hidden recesses, there grow the plants, trees and